Hey everybody, welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today here on the channel, we're going to be talking about 1956's The Searchers and its brand new Warner Archive 4K Blu-ray. But before we get into that 4K Blu-ray review, I always like to give a quick film review, and today is no different. So if you don't want to know anything about this classic Western, you're just here for the 4K Blu-ray review, please skip ahead to that right now. So back in 1956, John Ford, one of the greatest directors, teamed up yet again with one of the greatest actors of his generation, John Wayne. And these two went together like peanut butter and jelly. They made many great films together. When many people think of John Wayne, they also think of John Ford and vice versa. And that also goes with a director named Akira Kurosawa, because when John Wayne was filming a film in Japan, John Ford actually wrote to him. You know, it's the 1950s, so we wrote to each other. And he told him, hey, Akira Kurosawa is a big fan of ours, and you should go talk to him, introduce yourself to him. And I guess that's exactly what he did, but he referred to him as a fan of ours. Because when people thought of one of them, they thought of both of them. And The Searchers might be their magnum opus, the best film that they ever put out together. And it's also considered one of the greatest Westerns of all time. This movie to me, personally, it's not one of my all-time favorite Westerns, but it's a Western that I truly appreciate. Came out in the 1950s, really a great Hollywood Western is what this is. You can clearly see the influence of this on so many other directors who've even spoken about this film, including the greats like Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg, who even made reference to John Ford in his film from a couple years ago, The Fabelmans, which, which is basically based on Steven Spielberg's life and a meeting that he actually had with John Ford. I believe it was at Paramount, maybe it was Warner Brothers. Maybe it was Universal. I can't entirely remember the end of the film, but, John Ford, he was actually played by, in that movie, David Lynch. So John Ford's legacy still lives on to this very day, even though he's passed away over 50 years ago now. Same thing with John Wayne. And this movie was definitely going for it in the 1950s. There's a lot of stuff buried in the subtext, because a lot like what we talk about with Alfred Hitchcock, there was a code in place and movies had to end a certain way. We couldn't show certain things on film. So if you want to make a darker movie, you really had to hide that stuff in plain sight. And that's what this movie's trying to do, because Ethan Edwards, played by John Wayne in this movie, he's a very tough character to love. He's definitely the definition of an anti-hero. His character had to walk so great Clint Eastwood characters could run. This guy isn't your typical white hat wearing hero, and this movie isn't really going for the black hat wearing antagonist, although the antagonists in this movie are the Comanche Indians, the Native Americans, and this is something that hasn't aged very well with this movie, and it actually makes it a little bit tough for me to talk about, because I would love to praise this movie 100%, but I gotta look back on the movie and at the era and try to understand what they were thinking at the time, because, the heroes in this movie are the white men, and the antagonists are the Native Americans. They're savages, they're portrayed as in this movie, just, basically lower than human. And the heroes are the white men. And unfortunately for the time, that was just the way it was. That was the way of thinking. John Ford tried to, though, in this movie, tried to depict the Native Americans as something a little less savage. But again, he had to kind of hide it, because I think Roger Ebert said this himself, that he probably was nervous about this because of how the world was at the time. This is still before Jim Crow laws even were abolished. So it's a different time in American culture. So when you watch this movie, you have to understand that. But they still know that Ethan Edwards is not the greatest hero overall. Like, from the very beginning, when he's talking to his nephew Martin and he finds out that he's like 1/8 Comanche Indian, he gives him like a dirty look like a bunch of times. So you can see that really does bother him. And as the movie's going on, and what happens at the Edwards house, where his brother, his sister-in-law, who he does have a relationship with, like, that's kind of another thing that's like buried in the subtext, is that apparently, like, the two of them, like, they had some sort of relationship together. They show that in here as well. When the Indians kidnapped the two sisters, which one of the older version of Debbie's actually played by Natalie Wood, which is fascinating because the younger version was played by her sister as well. And that's what this movie's about. It's about finding the girl. Ethan Edwards and his nephew Martin, his adopted nephew Martin, that's what they're going to do. They're the searchers. Them and a bunch of other guys, including the Reverend, who's also a Texas Ranger. They're going to go find this girl, and it's going to take years to do it. And I love the way that they show the passing of time in this movie through the letters, and then we just see, as the letters are being narrated, we'll cut into what these characters are doing. And, some of these moments are good. Some of them haven't aged that well. Like, some of the comedy in this movie, probably was funny for the time, but when you watch it now, you're like, it's not really that funny. But again, this was a big Hollywood production, so to have these great themes in here, dealing with a character who isn't necessarily this great hero, you can really appreciate the movie even more, and that's why it's probably stood the test of time, is because of these deep themes in this movie. And then, of course, when we're building up to the third act and they find the girl, and Ethan Edwards like, no, she's not the same anymore. Martha would have even wanted me to kill her. She wouldn't want it, just showing like the deep racism within the entire family. And, you know, Martin's 1/8 Indian, and he's like, no, you're not going to do this. So basically, he's there to intervene in just how Ethan Edwards is just falling apart as this movie goes on. You know, he's looking for a purpose, and that's why you kind of can relate a little bit to the character, despite the fact that he's a little bit of a, like, kind of a psychopath, the path he's going down. But you understand what the hell this guy has been through, just fighting in wars. You know, he fought in the Civil War, then he's fighting, I believe it was like some sort of, he was fighting in a Mexican war at some point. That's what they find in his bag. The guy just, that's his purpose. That's it. And that's what the opening and closing shots of this movie is. You know, we open the door to Ethan Edwards arriving, and now we're closing the door on him, and that's it. He's not going to be spending the rest of his life with the family. No, he's going to go on and do something else. Completed his mission yet again, a year-long mission, but now he's just on to the next thing. He knows he's basically just a hammer, hammering in nails. Once that nail's in, he moves on to the next one. You know, he tries to be warm, but that's just not the kind of human he is. Like, when he sweeps up Debbie into his arms, that's him showing compassion the best he could, coming off of like, I was going to kill you before, but you know what? I'm learning as we go. I'm becoming a little bit warmer, despite the fact that I'm this hardened man and the world just kicked the shit out of me. You know, I still am human, and I just really love how that's depicted in this movie. This movie was also shot with beautiful Vista Vision, which is basically at the time IMAX, that super ultra widescreen, and then it's colored with Technicolor. Very similar like what they were doing with the Ten Commandments, what I just watched from, I believe it was a Paramount 4K Blu-ray, and Technicolor is just absolutely gorgeous. The score to this movie fits it perfectly. It's very well directed. You know, some of the performances, again, of the time, so they're a little bit, you can tell that like guys and girls are acting, and they're not necessarily falling into these characters. But of course, you have to look back at this movie as a movie that's what, over 70, that's almost 70 years old now, so you could forgive some of that stuff, and it's still one of the greatest westerns of all time. Like I said, not one of my all-time personal favorites. I feel like westerns did get better, and some of these big Hollywood westerns, as much as I love them, you know, they do have certain flaws that just haven't aged as well as some of the great spaghetti westerns out there from like Sergio Leone and Sergio Corbucci. But this is still a great western by one of the greatest American directors of all time, in John Wayne. And you have to watch this movie if you're even just a big fan of like modern day directors, or even directors from the 1970s, because you could just see the huge inspiration of this film on their films, whether they're in the western genre or not. So I can definitely highly recommend The Searchers, even if you don't want to pick up this Warner Archive 4K Blu-ray that we're going to talk about right now. And here it is, the first ever Warner Archive 4K Blu-ray. And I was very confused as to why they would release this under the Warner Archive brand. Warner Archive, I have a couple Blu-rays from them. You know, they're mostly underknown Warner Brothers, like classic films, like coming out in a certain era where Warner Brothers was, and a lot of the major studios were just pumping out film after film after film. And, you know, sometimes they ended up with some classics in there, like Casablanca or even The Searchers. You know, but even though they're making all these movies each year, you end up with some great classics. So to see Warner Archive do this, I was very curious, because why not just slap the Warner Brothers logo on there? But they didn't, and they gave us this beautiful 4K Blu-ray with this beautiful slipcover on it. No steelbook or anything, just this classic slipcover, which I really do like. Love the artwork on it. Makes me think that Unforgiven was paying homage a little bit to this with the sun setting. Also, definitely Paris, Texas took a lot from this movie, which no problem with me with that. And then you come inside and you get a Blu-ray disc and a 4K Blu-ray disc. It didn't actually come with a digital code, so maybe that's a big difference between the regular Warner Brothers release and this. And it also has the pack-in Blu-ray, which, you know, Warner Brothers, for the most part, especially lately, they've been trying to pack as much onto one 4K disc as they possibly can. And this is a 100 gigabyte disc, so they really did pack a lot onto it. And the movie actually really did need it when we get into the visuals of this, because it's a beautiful looking 4K. Just the, you know, I'm spoiling it a little bit here, but it really is one of the best looking visual 4Ks I have ever seen. But let's get into those extras a little bit first, because all your extras are going to be found on that Blu-ray. All of them are archival. Actually, it's really funny. You guys have heard me a million times say how the thing I look forward to most is a making of documentary. Well, apparently this movie was one of the first films to ever commission a making of documentary that was shown on TV back in the day to help promote the film. You could watch most of those clips right here on this Blu-ray. That is absolutely awesome. They have outtakes, probably one of the first films to ever do that. Now, it's outtakes without dialogue, so, you know, you're really just seeing people screw up the choreography, but still, it's pretty cool that that's on here for an old film like this. You get the trailers, you get an audio copy commentary track with Peter Bogdanovich, who would end up directing some great films himself. The Last Picture Show is a fantastic film, and of course he would end up on The Sopranos, so another great director influenced by The Searchers and John Ford. There's 2 documentaries on here looking back on the film. One from 1996, one that's a little bit more modern, that you have Martin Scorsese on there talking, and John Milius. Love that one. You can just, again, it's just awesome to hear people talk about how inspirational this film is to them. So the extras, they're all archival, but they're all pretty damn good extras. I had some fun watching them. I would have liked a little bit more, but still, I was still very happy that they gave us all these extras. Would have been cool to get some new commissioned one, but either way, I mean, this movie's how old? Not many people involved. I'm sure not many people, if any, are still alive from the time this movie came out. So we're really looking back on it from a historical perspective. So I can understand that. Now, the audio, there is only one audio track on here, and that's a DTS HD Master Audio 2.0. You know, one thing Warner Brothers was doing with their movies that came out at the end of 2024 is they gave us the original audio and they would slap on a brand new Dolby Atmos track. Now, this didn't get that. They wanted to stick with the classic audio, so maybe this is another thing that Warner Archive will do. It also gave us HDR and Dolby Vision, which for the most part, Warner Bros. Will just give us HDR10 and not give us the Dolby Vision, so that's another little difference. And that audio track, you know, for a movie this old, you wouldn't expect them to try and move this around to the other channels, so it just being a front-heavy 2.0 track, it's still really good. Definitely fits the time. There's some very little amount of like hissing, or I didn't hear a single pop in there. So for the most part, they cleaned this up very, very well, and it's the perfect audio track for a classic film like this. Now, those visuals, that is the best part. And one thing I found out, and I didn't even know this, is that Warner Brothers uses Fidelity in Motion, and that studio is the same ones that does all the encoding for studios like Arrow Video and Second Sight, who have some of the best 4K Blu-ray releases out there. A lot of time using 100 gigabyte discs. I know it's getting a little bit technical, but I just thought that was pretty cool that Warner Brothers, who for the most part have some of the best 4K transfers as far as a major studio go, them and like Sony, and to find out that they're using the same studio as far as the encoding goes as Arrow Video and Second Sight, that does make a lot of sense, because this is one of the best 4K Blu-rays I have ever seen, in my opinion. Clean this movie up beyond belief. Everything looks absolutely stunning. Now, when you watch it, obviously some of the night scenes, they didn't shoot these at night. You can't make that stuff look good. That's when we talk about source material. Like certain stuff in the film, it's impossible to like clean that up. But the stuff that they can clean up just looks incredible. There's a shot in this movie where our searchers are kind of moving along the lower part of a hill, and then up on the top of the hill, the Indians are moving along, and like they're moving at the same speed, and they're both in focus, like even at top and bottom. That's where we're using this VistaVision and Technicolor just to shine so much. VistaVision and Technicolor transfer so well to the 4K Blu-ray format. I was just talking about the 10 Commandments, but Technicolor, as far as North by Northwest, another Warner Brothers 4K Blu-ray release that recently came out, I would say that is the most comparable 4K Blu-ray to this one. You know, they came out at a similar era, using similar coloring techniques. So if you like North by Northwest, you are going to love The Searchers, because it's basically a better version as far as that goes. I think this is a better looking 4K Blu-ray. Just stunning, like the detail on them. And for a movie this old, to have it cleaned up this way, I'm sure nobody back in the day imagined that it could come to this. It doesn't look like a modern film. We maintain the look of how this film has always looked, but we cleaned it up. We put a nice fresh coat of paint on it, and it still feels like The Searchers. It still feels like a 1950s Hollywood Western. They did nothing to mess this up. I'm just so impressed with how the 4K visuals turned out for this one. I was a little skeptical with it being released under the Warner Archive brand, I'll be honest. I kind of felt like maybe they were going to try and bury it a little bit, because I'm like, this is The Searchers. This is one of the all-time greatest Westerns in history. People love this movie. I think it really deserves a great transfer. And you know what? They did. They gave this one all the bells and whistles. I'm blown away by how good it is. The only complaint I could really have is that I wanted more extras, but that's a minor complaint. Now, I just got this like at the literally on December 30th, so it didn't make my top 10 4K Blu-rays of 2024 just because I didn't get it in time, but this definitely would have made my list. And as far as the visuals go, it's right up there with the best of them. You know, if you're a fan of modern films and you watch a classic film, you know, you might be like, this doesn't look that great, but still, if you're a fan of classic films and you know how we can transfer that to the 4K Blu-ray format, you are going to absolutely love this one. And I have to give John Ford's The Searchers on 4K Blu-ray a really solid 9.5 out of 10. What a 4K Blu-ray release. You definitely have to pick this one up if you're a fan of Westerns and the fan of The Searchers. But if you're not a big fan of The Searchers and you're not a big fan of Westerns, and you're just somebody who wants to check out these visuals, wait for it to go on sale. It'll go on sale eventually. It is still a Warner Brothers release, so it won't always be at full price. But if you're somebody who's a big fan of this movie, I can recommend it at the full price. I don't think you'll be disappointed. But anyway, anyway, guys, that's going to do it here for me on another episode of Let's Talk. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this video if you could. And guys, we also have channel membership, so if you want to become a friend of the channel, a producer for the channel like John Doe Juggalo, or even a channel director like Mr. Smelly Potato and Frank from Frank's Medium Reviews, you can do that. But if you've got no money to throw away, guys, don't you worry about it at all. We just hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, get out in those streets, tell your friends about us, and then we'll be seeing you around.